Welcome back, friends. You're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry. Irene's down in the studio. She finished planting up the pea bed. Now she's down getting some last minute things done for an upcoming show. But I'm here in our pantry. That's where we have our freeze dryer. I need to clean it up. I need to make another run. I'll show you how I clean it and why I'm doing what I'm doing. A lot of people will use vinegar or soapy water and things like that for cleaning their freeze dryer, and that's great. It will work. I happen to use isopropyl alcohol. That's rubbing alcohol, and I use a high concentration, so this is actually 99% rubbing alcohol. Isopropyl alcohol is something I'm really familiar with because I used it in engineering situations, and it works well. The good thing about it is it will dry clean. There'll be no odors, no flavors, no greasy anything, no soap, no nothing left behind. So it's great from that standpoint. Now, to clean the freeze dryer means I have to take off this gasket. This gasket actually seals up against this acrylic door. That provides a vacuum seal. I'm just going to go ahead and set this up top, and I'll start pulling the trays out. There's a little connector here in the back that has a latch that you have to press down. It has a weather-tight connector, which is good because it's being used in a freeze dryer situation. Now, there could be liquid get into the chamber, or they could get food particles. That's what I'm going to make sure I clean out. I'm just going to set the trays aside, and I need a cloth. Now, to clean this chamber out, this is the chamber here. It's kind of like a oversized propane tank. It's made out of stainless steel. It is airtight, which also means that it's vacuum tight. I want to get all of the debris out of the chamber. There is a little bit in there. You know, the smell of isopropyl alcohol reminds me very much of being a young kid and going to the doctor's office, because this is what they use to get your arm disinfected. This chamber wasn't dirty. The food that I processed in here was relatively self-contained. That means it wasn't going to be a lot of dust and particles flying around, but there always is a little bit. So the chamber's been cleaned out. I'm going to check the trays. Actually, the rack where the trays go. Now, these are dry and they're clean. And this rack has a series of heaters attached to each of these flat spots where the trays go in. And that's used to heat the food during the final drying process. It's freeze drying because you get the food cold, 20 below zero or colder, and then it starts sublimating. And sublimation just means you turn the solid ice into vapor and it gets sucked out of the chamber. Anissa came to visit me. She's over here in her favorite spot. There's only one way to put this connector back together. It has a little snap, a little click when it goes in right. Now it's possible to get this tray in upside down, but it's really simple to put in. There, it's in. Now I need to clean up this gasket. I don't want anything to be in the way of getting the vacuum to seal up. I need more isopropyl alcohol on my rag. Now this rag is used for a variety of purposes in our house, chief of which is clean up in the kitchen when I make a spill. So we don't use it for cleaning the car, picking up oil, cleaning up big messes. We have a separate set of rags that we use for that. Now this rag is not ideal. Ideal would be a microfiber or something else that had absolutely no lint. Make sure I get all the dirt off it. And the dirt is just food. It isn't really dirt. It's just food. To finish cleaning up, I just put the gasket back in place. I want it to go back in place, but I also need to make sure, the door's a little dirty, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that off. Isopropyl alcohol does a really great job of removing grease and other contaminants. And you can see where this rubber gasket hits the door, because you will get some food particles trapped on the door. What I'm doing right now is removing all those. There's no point in leaving them. I'm looking at the gasket to make sure that it makes a seal all the way around against the door. You can't see it on the camera, but it looks like a black line that goes around the outside of the freeze dryer. I'll finish wiping that up. And with that, the freeze dryer is clean and ready for the next run. You know, you may wonder why I'm wearing gloves. 99% isopropyl alcohol can get kind of rough on your hands. I use isopropyl alcohol quite a lot for a variety of purposes. One is this freeze dryer. I don't want to dry my hands out, so I wear rubber gloves. Now I could let these gloves dry out and use them again because there's nothing on them, but I find it more difficult to put the gloves on the second time around because my hands are relatively large across and the gloves don't fit on really nicely. Now all I need to do is go put these things away, and we'll talk some more about freeze drying and why we're doing it. Everything's put back where it belongs. The isopropyl alcohol is on the cart. Gloves are in the trash. Don't tell Irene, but I throw them in the trash. It's not really expensive. Yeah, I could reuse them, but as I said, it's a little difficult. Now, why are we using the freeze dryer? For years, we've been taking canned goods to the events that we do for Irene's business. Most of them aren't too long a drive. Mostly it's 500 to 700 miles away, which is long enough, and some of it's over some pretty rough roads. But we do have one event that comes up here in a few months that we drive 2,500 miles one way to the event. And that's in Pennsylvania. And let me tell you, some of the roads that we drive, I-40, I-44, and going east, are a real mess. Now they're getting repaired, but that doesn't take care of today. We have a variety of issues with canned food in jars. Number one, it's glass jars. Number two, we go over rough roads and it's easy to lose a seal accidentally. That means we have to leave a ring on it, which means that we don't necessarily know whether or not the food has arrived intact on the other end, which could be an issue. We could have some spoiled food. Mostly we haven't had that problem. Mostly we've had glass breakage. The big problem, if we're taking 25 to 30 days worth of food with us on the road for 3 meals a day, that's a lot of weight. Hundreds and hundreds of pounds. We'd like to not have that weight in the truck. So what do? We could dehydrate some food, but you can't really dehydrate meat. We really need to either have that canned, fresh, or freeze-dried. Freeze-dried is a great alternative. It's lightweight. The trick, though, is you need to know how to reconstitute it. And that's really the issue that we're experimenting with right now. We have a variety of ways to rehydrate the food that have run through the freeze dryer. We have some very specific dishes that we like, that I made, that have freeze dried into portions that we will eat as a meal. And because a lot of the use of this food is for camping and when we're doing hard work, I tend to make the portions a little large. So I'm just fine if some of the food gets wasted, because we waste a whole lot less this way than if we run it in a can, a jar. I have 3 totes, large totes like we put everything else in, full of freeze-dried food. At this point, I have 2 more runs to bake before we go to our next event. We do have a few things that we need to be concerned about. One is temperature. This freeze dryer is really intended for consumer use, meaning that normally it's going to be used in a house that's going to be less than 80 or 85 degrees. We're a passive solar house. That means, hiccup. That means that part of our heating comes from south-facing windows. Our cooling comes from those same south-facing windows where we can open up and allow a breeze to come through. But when it's 95 or 100 degrees ambient temperature outside, that's the air temperature outside, it's going to be that same temperature here in the pantry, and that's a problem. So I need to plan our freeze drying expeditions to when the temperatures are going to be reasonable and we're going to have enough solar to run the freeze dryer. Well, let's talk about cost. My calculations say that by the end of this year, we will break even on the cost of this machine in saved food costs, saved broken jars, and having enough food that we don't have to go to a retail establishment, go eat out, if we don't want to. And that's a huge, huge issue when you're in the kind of business that Irene has. If we go eat lunch at a low-priced establishment, we're going to pay $25 or $30 between the two of us. And that's really low cost, and it's going to be a sandwich. You get tired of sandwiches after a few days, but if we go eat someplace more moderate, like a Cracker Barrel, we're going to spend $50 for that same lunch. Well, if you eat 2 meals out in a day, between the two of us, we're going to spend more than $100. That means when we go on a 30-day trip, we could easily spend $2,000 to $3,000 eating out. And that's just way, way too much. The business is getting squeezed from all directions. People want lower prices, but the materials cost have gone up. How much? Well, 3 times in the last 5 years for some of the products that Irene uses. It means that her pewter products actually cost more than her bronze products. It costs more per ounce for her pewter. That's really strange, and you can't sell a pewter item for the same price as a bronze item. It just doesn't make sense. So we squeeze on the low end and we squeeze on the high end. There's less competition and more competition. By less competition, there's fewer people traveling to these events and carrying the kind of wares that we do. But there's businesses from China supplying almost the right stuff, or at least it looks that way in the thumbnails. And that's because a lot of times those thumbnails aren't their products, they're our products and other friends' products. Can you do something about that? No, not really. You can go argue with the Federal Trade Commission and say that we need to block those imports, but you know, those companies have another way of getting in. They change their company name and they come in anyway. So that's a losing battle. Irene focuses on handcrafted quality products that are as historically accurate as she can make. And she can make some pretty accurate items. She does a huge amount of research to determine what's actually right. And she has the documentation with her. She knows this stuff cold. A lot of customers come to see her because it's her and her business. They know I'm just the pretty face in the booth. Well, really, I'm just the pretty face in the booth, and that might not be saying a whole lot. But I'm there to help. But mostly I'm chief cook and bottle washer. Well, hopefully not so much a bottle washer now because we're freeze-drying most of our food. Irene's down in the studio working away. I think she's going to work on making a couple of more peninsular brooches. And then she's going to come up for dinner. I have to figure out what we're going to do for dinner today. We have some roast beef that I cooked, but we've had a lot of roast beef sandwiches, so I'm thinking that's probably not a good idea. Maybe I'll do some spaghetti that I'll also freeze dry. Who knows? Well, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications because there's a lot more stuff going on and it's really, really crazy hectic right now. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. And we'll see you on the next one. Hey, don't forget to brainstorm. We're still doing it.